Good evening and welcome to the election guide for the Perplexed, presented by James Marlow. James is an Israel political analyst with extensive knowledge of Israeli partisan candidates through more than 40 years of broadcasting and journalism. He's presented on numerous well-known networks and written for newspapers. The format of this evening is that James will speak for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then we will move into a Q&A. During the Q&A, you can either unmute yourselves and ask a question direct, or through the session, using the chat box, you can send me any questions you'd like me to ask on your behalf. With that, I give you James Marlow.
Thank you, Gary, and a very good evening to everyone. I see some familiar faces at Ner Yisrael. It is because, of course, in the past, I have sometimes visited on a Shabbat. It was a few years ago. It was in the days of Rabbi Kimchi being there. And the reason why I sneaked in on a Shabbat sometimes is just before Musaf, he used to give some really excellent divrei Torah. So after Shabbos, I used to scribble it down, and I've used it many times since that time. Of course, Rabbi Kimchi was somebody who was giving a talk to our shore, the Dayan Aaron Troy's Beis HaMedrash in Hendon last week. Around 250 people joined. And I was also privileged to hear Rabbi Zobin just a few days ago giving his Pesach halachot shiur. But at the crucial moment, at the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes, where this year is different from all other years, of course, the 3 days and the times changing in the United Kingdom, my battery went. So I didn't get to quite hear the end, but we are not here to talk about Pesach. Of course, you have other people to do that. And indeed, Rabbi Zobin Shlita, who I believe will be joining us later this evening. But I am here to remind you that Pesach is just over 1 week away. And just under 1 week is the 4th general election in Israel within 2 years. There are 39 political parties running, and I'll give you a rundown of some of those parties, not all of them, of course, because otherwise we'll be here all night. And as you can see, the sun behind me is still struggling to go down here in Jerusalem. No, it's not a real picture. It is a cover picture. And we can talk about some of the candidates and the proportional representation system, which I think works quite well, but there are other parts of the system that doesn't work well. Let me just kick off, because right now it is 10:05 in Israel. There is somebody who, there's at least one person who's joined us from Israel. And one of the big dilemmas with Israelis who vote, and I myself have voted 5 or 6 times, and I've had the exact same dilemma. And I've been asked this question many times. In Israel, I have given maybe not hundreds of talks, but certainly around 70 or 80 talks to Israelis to explain to them about the PR system, how it works, what you do when you go into the voting booth, and also the different platforms of the different political parties, what they stand for, the left and the right in the olden days. Of course, there's no left and right as such today. And one of the difficulties is that people are literally faced with 39 political parties running this time. By the way, for those of you who are interested, 39 is not a record. No, sir. April 2019, the first of these 4 general elections, that was a record. 47 parties registered to vote, registered to run. A couple of them dropped out just before election day in April 2019, but 47 political parties is quite a lot for a very small country like Israel. Everyone's heard of Israel, of course, but most people around the world can't even find Israel on the map because it's a dot on the map. And yet 47 political parties run. This time it's only 39. It should have been more. But many parties, believe it or not, dropped out. There were 5 or 6 political parties that swore that they were going to topple Netanyahu, that they, in some cases, would be going to become the next prime minister. For example, Moshe Ya'alon, the former defense minister from the Likud party, he was moved aside. He was so angry, he stormed out of the cabinet. He left the Likud party and swore he was going to run against Netanyahu. In fact, he joined up with Blue and White. Blue and White, of course, as you probably know, fell apart into 4 different segments. He stuck with Yesh Atid, which is led by Yair Lapid. And eventually he broke away from him with his Telem faction. It just didn't get any votes whatsoever, and he pulled out. So that's interesting. So there should have been more parties. But let me just address the idea of how you would choose a vote. The way I do it is, you decide whether you're on the left wing or the right wing or the religious bloc. So if you're on the left wing, right now, of the main parties, let's not talk about all 39 of them, but the main parties, about 15 of them, which have a chance of getting into the Knesset, we're looking at Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid. He's polling right now at 20 seats, 19 to 20 seats. Then the other party on the left, of course, would be Labour, re-emerged. It came from nowhere. It was gone in the last Knesset. There was one independent sitting there, Merav Michaeli. She managed to get control of the Labour Party. She ran for the leadership and she won. The others were kicked out or resigned or left, like Amir Peretz. And Merav Michaeli is now polling between 5 to 6 seats, which is extraordinary because the party was pretty much finished. But her and her candidates are definitely on the left, left as in merits. So that's the second party you've got, Yesh Atid, Labour. The third one on the left would be Meretz. Some people say far left. The Meretz party really struggling to get over that 3.25 minimum percent in order to get into the Knesset. That's the minimum threshold that you need, which is equivalent to 4 Knesset seats. So if you don't get 4 Knesset seats, that means you're not in the Knesset. And all those who voted for your party, those votes are thrown in the bin. The other party on the left is Blue and White, led of course by Benny Gantz. In the last election, 33 seats. The election before that, 33 seats. And the election before that, in April 2019, when this whole long saga started, he got 35 seats. He also is now struggling to get over that minimum threshold of 3.25%. I think he's going to do it. My gut feeling tells me it's going to happen because I'm fascinated by the polls and I look over at several of them per week. And in the Jewish Weekly, which is a paper which comes out once a week and you can get it from all good Jewish newsagents and Jewish shops. It's the blue one, by the way, it's the blue title. The other one is the Jewish News, it's the red title. This one is the Jewish Weekly. So in there, I compile a poll table each week. And I think based on the polling over the last few weeks by the major polling companies in Israel, Benny Gantz will get 4 seats, possibly 5 seats, but anything can happen on the day. So on the left, you're looking at those, what do we say, 5 parties, Yesh Atid, Labour, Meretz, Blue and White. Well, that's 4 parties, 4. If you're not on the left, you want to scrap those parties. Let's go for the religious parties. On the religious side, you have the 2 main parties, Yahadut HaTorah, which is 2 factions, Degel HaTorah. Degel is the Litvak, the Lithuanian, strictly Orthodox Haredi party. And of course, Agudat Yisrael, Agudus is known in Yiddish. And that is the Hasidic party, which contains mostly Belz, Vishnitz, and many other Hasidic groups that are part of the government. Together they make up United Torah Judaism, Yahadut HaTorah. All the other party is Shas. Many people have heard of Shas before. That's your choice on the religious side. If you feel that you're on the right of politics, center to right or right, then you've got a choice again. That is Likud, known as a center to right party, led by, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been prime minister since 2009. He has knocked out all of his opponents. He's still fighting against Yair Lapid, who is his nearest rival. And by the way, the Likud party is polling between 29 to 30 seats right now. So that's a good 9 or 10 seats away from his nearest rival, which is Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid. So on the right, you've got Likud. You've also got a new breakaway party from Likud led by Gidon Saar, who is another person who fell out with Netanyahu. And there are many people who don't get along with him. He stormed out. By the way, firstly, he ran against Netanyahu for the leadership about less than a year ago for the leadership of the Likud party. He got less than 20% of the votes. And this is, by the way, not from Likud members of Knesset. This is from the Likud membership, which is around 250,000 members. Not all of them vote. It's around 60%, 65% turnout. But nevertheless, he only got about 20% of the votes. That's the Likud. Gidon Saar's new party is called New Hope, Tikva Hadasha. He initially, when he came onto the scene, was polling at 21 seats. The polls now say he's down to 9 to 10 seats. His campaign has been awful. I've seen him on many television interviews. I've been in various different Zooms with him and with other journalists. And the only thing that he's campaigning for, besides anti-Netanyahu, is the annexation or the Israeli sovereignty over Area C, Judea and Samaria, which Netanyahu promised he would do, but put it on hold because he favored, and I think rightly so, a peace treaty and a trade treaty with the UAE and with Bahrain. So Gidon Saar basically is just anti-Netanyahu, wants him out, and is running as prime minister or for prime minister against Netanyahu. But Netanyahu being around 30 seats right now polling, and the polls are normally quite correct, as opposed to Gidon Saar's 9 seats. Well, even his number 2 says there's no way that Gidon Saar can be prime minister with 9 seats. Next on the right, you have Yamina, led by Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett is quite a character because he's been in several parties. He was originally the leader of the Mafdal party. He left that to start his own faction because he wanted to have complete control over what he does and how he does it, and not allow the rabbis to tell him, the Mafdal rabbis, which is the modern Zionistic, religious Zionist rabbis who would tell him. Then he formed Yamina. Then in the last election, it joined up with the Jewish Home Party, which is the old Mafdal. Then he broke away from that. He's running himself right now. Now, Naftali Bennett has many enemies, just like Netanyahu. But he has zoomed past Gidon Saar in the polls. Why? Well, my reason is, or my suggestion could be, is because that when Naftali Bennett has sat in on several interviews and several Zoom calls, including with myself, he's not just focused on anti-Netanyahu rhetoric, but he's also come up with other policies, if you call anti-Netanyahu a policy. He's also come up with other important issues besides security in Israel. Social and economic issues he's discussed. Naftali Bennett wrote a book of how to deal with the COVID crisis and how to get people back to work, because there's almost 20% unemployment right now in Israel, almost 1 million people out of work. And the next big task in Israel, besides the security issues, is how to get people back to work, which is quite a challenge. So Naftali Bennett is talking more about that. But nevertheless, you would think that votes from the right would be taken from the Likud party, but it's not. The Likud party led by Netanyahu is standing strong at around 28, 29, 30 seats. It's Naftali Bennett is taking them away from Gidon Saar's party, and Gidon Saar originally was taking them away from Naftali Bennett. Bizarre. That's your third party on the right. A fourth party is the Religious Zionist Party, again, a breakaway from the old Mafdal, Jewish Home Party. Jewish Home, by the way, are not running. And it's led by a man called Bezalel Smotrich. Now, he has allied himself with the far-right Hazit group or political party, which is equivalent to the National Front, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir. And some of his views are very extreme. And Smotrich was criticized for joining with him, but it was the only way to get them over, or the possibility of getting them over the 3.25 minimum threshold line. And they are right now polling at 4. Some of the polls show 5 seats. So a coalition would be made up, if it's on the right, would be Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the person to beat right now. Netanyahu is the prime minister. Netanyahu is the one who's been prime minister for a long time. He's got a lot of experience. He is a magician. He is an expert. He is a wizard when it comes to election campaigns. He loves them. He's out and about all the time. I don't know where his stamina comes from. The man is 71 years old. He is up pretty much 16, 17, 18 hours a day, non-stop. It's quite extraordinary. When he's not doing videos, when he's not out in the streets, when he's not meeting people, when he's not standing on a soapbox talking, when he's not being interviewed by the television networks, he's tweeting non-stop. Remember, Donald Trump used to do that. And I've been looking at his tweets today. He just loves it because he knows that no one can come close to him. However, he's also aware that in order for him to get to that magic number of 61 seats, 120 seats within the Knesset, so therefore a majority is 61 plus, he needs the right-wing parties. If he's only going to get 30 seats, and of course his satellite parties are the 2 religious parties, Yahadut HaTorah and Shas, together they're about 15 seats. So let's do the math. 30 plus 15, we said is 45. Still a long way to go before you get to 61. 45. Let's say Smoldrich, Betzalel Smoldrich, which is the religious Zionist party, gets over the line. You got 4 seats there. So where are we? We've got 30, 45 plus 4 is 39. Is that right? 49 seats. So we still need about 12 seats in order to get to 61. Now, Naftali Bennett is very smart because he's not coming anywhere near Netanyahu's seats, but he's leaving the door open as to where he goes. And I think it's very wise. He has not said he will not sit with Netanyahu under any circumstances. That's exactly what Yair Lapid has said. That's exactly what Gidon Sa'ar has said. That's exactly what Labour Meretz have said. But he hasn't said that because he says, I'm going to wait to see what the election results are. I want to be prime minister, says Naftali Bennett. I want to sit in that seat. I want to oust Netanyahu. It's time for him to go. Thank you very much for everything you've done, prime minister. Go home on your bike. We want you out. But he's realistic as well. And the poll numbers are not showing what he wishes. So if he was to join, let's say he gets 12 or 13 seats, which might get them over the whole coalition, over 61, you've got a government. And we don't go to a 5th election. However, if that doesn't happen, or Naftali Bennett demands something ridiculous like 10 ministries, let's say he gets 12 seats. And that was the problem last time. People criticized and condemned Netanyahu for doing the dirty on Naftali Bennett. He got 6 seats. It actually went down to 5 because one of them broke away and joined the government. However, 5 seats. But with his original 6 seats, let's talk about that. That was the original poll when the last election was 1 year ago. So that's March 2020. Naftali Bennett demanded 4 ministries plus a chairmanship of one of the Knesset committees. That was his bottom line. I think eventually he did go down to 3 ministries, but he wasn't a major force. In order for Likud to have made a coalition, it had to get part of blue and white and break blue and white up, which he did successfully. And of course, as you know, Benny Gantz broke his faction and joined with Netanyahu. 2 of the Labour people left the Labour Party, joined Netanyahu. The person from Gesher, she joined Netanyahu. There was a new faction that broke away from Yesh Atid, which called itself Derech Eretz, Hausner and Zvi Hausner and second name his name just escapes me right now. They also joined. So there was a government. It was never going to last for 4 years. It was never going to make it to 2 years. I gave it 1 year. I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did, but we were always going to another general election. This election now is about whether Netanyahu can form a coalition or whether we go, as I said, to the fifth election, which, by the way, is going to be, this election is just before Pesach. The next election will be just after Sukkot. So write it down if you're interested in Israeli elections. So that is a look at the political parties. And that's a look at how the pollsters are doing right now. You want to talk about the system, the PR system, whether you like it or whether you don't like it, whether it should be changed or not. For all those who say yes, just nod your head like this, and all those who say no, just do this, so I know which one it is. And if those are not sure, then just stay still. All right, so let's go with a PR system. I think the PR system, proportional representation, works very well in Israel. Why? Because you have so many different segments of Jewish society. I think they should be represented, if they can, in the Knesset. So that means those on the left, the far left, the secular, those on the right, the far right, religious, non-religious, those on the right, secular, which, by the way, we missed out Yisrael Beiteinu's Avigdor Lieberman's party. He is on the right, but he hates Netanyahu, loathes it. And also, he doesn't care very much for the religious parties. Even just again today, he said, I will not, under any circumstances, sit with the Haredim. I want them out. And he's made some very, very negative derogatory comments about them, Shas and United Torah Judaism, which I think is very unnecessary, to the point that he's been called an anti-Semite by some of the language he's used. Unnecessary, because really, it's at the end of the day, it's the poll numbers that matter. But onto the PR system. It works whereby that you have to, as I said earlier, get 3.25% a minimum, which is equivalent to 4 Knesset seats. Now in Israel, and I'm not sure whether we have some Israelis who have voted before inside of Israel, but we don't have districts, or what the UK calls constituencies. There is no, and by the way, it's one of the reasons, and I wrote about this last week in the Jewish Weekly for anyone who might have read it. It's one of the reasons why you get former chief of staffs running in the election. I'm pretty certain that if they had to canvass, because they had to win a constituency and they had to knock on people's doors, I'm pretty certain you wouldn't get the former general, the chief of staff of the IDF knocking on people's doors saying, can I have your vote, please? This is me, this is who I am. Yes, sure, we do that, we're looking to do this. Please give me your votes. The way that you get into the Knesset is that you have a political party, you have a leader. So let's take, for example, Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid, polling at 20 seats. He's been around since 2013. He suddenly emerged onto the scene with 19 seats from nowhere. Amazing. But you see, with a party like that, and it applies to almost all the other parties, except for Likud, except for Labour, except for Meretz, and except for Balad, which is one of the Arab factions, a radical nationalist anti-Israel faction. But they also, believe it or not, have democratic elections in their system. So you have, we'll give Yair Lapid as an example. Yair Lapid is number one. Now he wants to get his buddies in behind him. So if he gets Knesset seats according to the proportional representation system, he therefore wants to have his friends on there, people who will back him, people who will support him. In other words, he's in charge, but he wants people who will listen to what he has to say. He doesn't want any rebellion. He doesn't want anyone opposing him. So he chooses who he wants. He's got a professor, he's got a doctor, he's got a good friend, he's got a politician who's moved from one of the other political parties, and that's how he makes his list. If he gets 20 seats, all those people on his list, which he's compiled, is because of the background over here, so you can't quite see it, but I'm holding a piece of paper up. All of those become Knesset members. Now, they're not representative of any constituency whatsoever. And it's one of the difficulties in Israeli society. In the United Kingdom, if you have a problem wherever you live, up and down the country, of course, including Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. For example, you can't get your kids into the local school. Doesn't always apply in the Jewish from areas, because we tend to get our kids into the Jewish schools. And there's normally a way to do that. And if there's not a way to do it, you probably don't go to your MP, but maybe he can help. But generally speaking, you would speak to your MP because you want some help, or about the bus lanes are closing down, or bus routes is closing down. You speak to your MP about that. Problem with your local hospital, you speak to your MP about that. So you've got problem with regard to benefits or your pensions or something, you bring your MP into that. You can't do that in Israel because there aren't any MPs representing you. So when you have a difficulty, when you have a problem, what do? You go to that department, but they will pass you on to another department and another one and another one. No one takes responsibility. That needs to change. It has to change. The system is leaking right now. So when people talk about electoral reform, that's one of the things that needs to happen. Also, the other question is whether you raise the minimum threshold right now from 3.25% to a higher rate of 4% or 5%. It may disencourage the smaller parties from running. It may not, because they get money from all different sources and groups, and sometimes it's EU funded, believe it or not. Or there's two Green parties that run, or at least used to run. I haven't checked if they're both running this time. They never get past the minimum threshold, but they're always running. Costs a lot of money to run the party, to register it and get your candidates listed down on that electoral list. Somehow they find the money every single time somebody supports them. If you raise it to 5%, it makes it difficult to get into the Knesset. But one of our problems in Israel is that we have so many breakaway parties. There is no difference between Gideon Sa'ar's party and Benjamin Netanyahu's party. They're all Likudniks. They all believe in the same thing. They all want the same thing, but they loathe each other. Now, in the Conservative Party or in the Labour Party, if you disagree with a colleague, you disagree with them. You might still continue to sit next to them in the committee meetings or in the House of Commons. You might have different factions there, but you don't suddenly storm out and start your own political party. I mean, perhaps in the UK, one of the reasons is because it would be very difficult to get it off the ground because there's no PR system there. But in Israel, you do that all the time. You don't get on with your leader or with somebody else, and you walk out. Yair Lapid's number two, a trusted colleague, Ofra Shelah. He was somebody who was by Yair Lapid's side until he decided, you know what? I want to run for the leadership of the Yesh Atid party. Lapid said, well, maybe in the future, we'll see what happens. He left the party, started his own political party to run against him. But he's on the left. It's exactly the same policies as Yair Lapid. Actually, to be fair, he's more left than Lapid in terms of his policies. But he also had to pull out because he didn't have enough support. Same thing for former IDF Chief of Staff Moshe Ya'alon. Likudnik, on the right, great supporter of Netanyahu, until Netanyahu says, look, I need that Ministry of Defense. Lieberman's coming in. I need to boost up my coalition. Lieberman's got 7 seats. He wants defense. I need to move you on. So angry, stormed out of the party, as I mentioned at the beginning. Started his own political party. And again, didn't have enough support. He's out of the game right now. One of our great difficulties is not being able to get on. And I look down at my time. It's coming up on 30 minutes right now. So let me just wrap up before we take questions with the Arab parties. Joint List. They were the 3rd largest party. They're not now because one of the factions has dropped out. We can learn something from Joint List. Joint List is made up of Hadash, Hadash is the old communist party. It was actually started by Jews in the early days. And slowly the Jews realized that communism is not really working. The kibbutz artsy movement slowly faded away. People saw the opportunities of a free market economy. And socialism is not that popular now in Israel. It's not that popular anywhere around the world. But there's still a Hadash party. There's still the Communist Party in Israel. It's 99% Arab. The Hadash party joined up with the Balad party. I mentioned them earlier. The Balad is the secular, radical nationalist party, openly loathes Israel, hates Israel. It's had some real radical members of Knesset in the past. Azmi Bashara was somebody who comes to mind right now. Azmi Bashara was somebody who was on the telephone to Hezbollah leaders, directing the missiles when they were firing missiles from Lebanon. A little bit more to the southwest, you'll catch that Jewish community. He fled Israel once the Shabak realized what he was doing as an MK. And he still actually, or his family still managed to get state stipends. Believe it or not, for about 2.5 years before the media picked up on that, and then suddenly it was out in the open. Azmi Bashara never denied it. He was proud of it. He found a home initially in Syria, and I think has moved on somewhere else since that time for safety reasons. Another woman, a woman, I'm just thinking her name has just escaped me right now. I remember walking past her a couple of times in the Knesset. My blood used to boil. This is a woman, tiny little petite woman, who again was so vocal out against Israel, hated the idea of soldiers, walked up to Arab policemen, Israeli policemen, spat in their face, called them traitors, did the same thing for Arab IDF members, officers, those people working in the army. Somebody who called for another intifada, called for the kidnapping of soldiers. She's no longer an MK, but this is how radical the Balad party really is. Then you've got the Ta'al party, which is more a Frum party, an Islamic party. And the other party was also an Islamic party called Ra'am. Those four factions have nothing in common whatsoever, except Israel. They can say, you know what? Israel's a racist country. Israel's an apartheid country. Israel, we need to raise the flag of how bad Israel is treating the Arabs. It didn't really work. They were getting votes. They got 15 seats in the Knesset election before last. And then it went down to 13 seats. Then something dramatic happened. One of the leaders of the parties, his name is Mansour Abbas, no relation to Mahmoud Abbas of the PLO. Mansour Abbas said, this doesn't make sense. We should be smart like the Jews. Whether you go into government or whether you stay out of government, the parties in the Knesset take advantage of whichever government is in power, whether it's a center to right party or center to left party, or a center party like Kadima, because the left has pretty much disappeared for the last pretty much, well, certainly since 2015. Mansour Abbas said, we should be taking stipends for the government. We should be supporting them where we agree with them, and we should be opposing them where we disagree with them. We should be doing what Shas and United Torah Judaism does, take money for the schools and take money for their own communities. We've got enough problems within our own Arab communities. We can actually benefit by being part of the government or supporting the government on certain votes. The other three factions disagreed with Ra'am. Ra'am broke away. Ra'am is running by itself. It's now polling just over the minimum 3.25%. Now, Ra'am could possibly support Netanyahu from outside the government. It's not likely to go into a right-wing government. Or Ra'am could support a Yesh Atid government, a center to the left government. He's just leaving his options open. Very smart indeed. We, the Israelis, need to learn something from the Arabs. And that's something that we can learn. That is the limud. that when you disagree with your colleagues, stick with each other. Work out exactly what it is that you agree with. It could be that you might agree with each other more things than you disagree with each other. 60, 70%. Don't leave the party and start your own faction, because by all those people, more people left on the left to start their own factions than on the right. And that's probably, anything can happen between now and Tuesday, but that's probably what may get Netanyahu over the line of 61 seats. I think we'll hold it there, and let's just see if we've got anything which has come through in terms of a question or a joke.
Thank you, James. That's been absolutely fascinating as a tour of the Israeli voting system and current setup. A very quick question whilst people are gathering thoughts. Correct me if I'm wrong, my impression is that one of the Arab MKs might be joining Likud? Or if I'm misunderstanding, or that Likud was trying to attract in one of the Arab parties?
Yes, so there's two things over there. Firstly, Netanyahu did appoint on his list of candidates an Arab whose name, again, just escapes me right now because I haven't mentioned it for some time, but he's number 36 on the list. It's very unlikely, well, it's a possibility, but it's very unlikely, according to the polls right now, that the Likud party will get 36 seats. That's how many seats they got last time, 1 year ago, in the election. So that is obviously an Israeli Arab who very much supports the Likud party. By the way, a new poll came out just a couple of days ago. Excuse me, we are Tuesday, I'm getting lost of time. So it was last Thursday, done by the Israel Democratic Society, I write about it this week in the Jewish Weekly, and it found that 1 in every 3 Arabs, Israeli Arabs, want Netanyahu to remain as prime minister. So, okay, it's only 33%, but nevertheless, it's probably higher than what most people expect. But you could be that you're referring to the Ra'am party, which initially was seen as perhaps maybe going to give support to Netanyahu from outside the government, if indeed he gets across the minimum threshold of 3.25%. But just today, he actually went to meet, or maybe it was yesterday, he went to meet with Yair Lapid and said, stop saying this about me. Stop saying I'm in Netanyahu's pocket. I'm not in anyone's pocket. I could be in your pocket, you know. If you get to form the government, again, I could support you. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but stop saying I'm in his pocket, because I'm not. This is Mansour Abbas speaking from the Ra'am party. But it's smart. It's recognizing that it's great to get votes from the Arab public, but if you're going to do absolutely nothing with it and you're not going to help your community, it's the reason why the joint list has fallen from 13 seats. They're now polling at 8 seats because the Arabs are going elsewhere. And some of them, believe it or not, are going to vote for the Likud party. More are voting for the Likud party than the Labour Party, that's for sure. And that was also the case in 2015.
Wow, thank you. One of the comments that has been provided, not really a question, was, please tell James how clear it was. Finally understand what's going on.
Okay.
So from a member
Thank you. Would you tell me who that, which name that is, please?
If that person wants to own up to their name, they can, but otherwise I should keep it anonymous.
Okay, fair enough.
If anybody has any further questions, please come off mute and feel free to ask, or alternatively, text us your question.
Okay. And just to fill in the time, over here, if indeed I get the question right, we can all clap, and if I get it wrong, we're going to move along very quickly and pretend I never got asked that question.
Okay, that comment was from Ruth Michaels. Thank you. Ruth, you said how clear it was.
Hi, can I say something? I just want to say I'm coming to you from Netanya, and we have been struggling very much with who to vote for, because although I lived here in the 70s when it was a lot clearer because the parties were far more defined than they are now, it has helped at least put a little bit in perspective who everybody is and what they stand for. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. Are you still? I'm so sorry. I can't see your name because there's a line right under where your name is written and I can't see it.
Okay, well, the name on there will say David Fischel, but I'm Shelley Fischel.
Okay. All right. Fine. I wasn't going to call you David.
Okay.
Davida could have been as well. So am I understanding that you are struggling as to which of the 39 political parties you're voting for? And don't worry, I'm not going to tell you which one to vote for, but
No, well, first of all, I wasn't aware there were 39. And I did know, I mean, I do know Lieberman's posters about Memshala Bli Charedim are obnoxious. It's just a very, not Bli, anybody would be obnoxious. So that's just horrible. But really just knowing who everybody is helpful.
This has been This has been a fascination for me. I get very excited when elections come along. I do get excited when the United States election comes along. That's every 4 years, and that's set in stone. United Kingdom, it's also gone through a few elections since 2015 as well. And that's quite exciting. But in Israel, there's something about elections and the fact that the candidates move from one list to another, and the new political parties suddenly break up, and then they form their own parties, and then they disappear. That is just, you can call it a sickness. You can say to me, James, you should be doing something else with your life. And I do, but nevertheless, I just find it really fascinating because a lot of people don't understand how it works. So I'm sure Shelley and David, you have voted before, but here's one. Go ahead, David.
No, this is our first time. We made only a year and a half ago, and we actually weren't in the country last March, so we couldn't vote. So this is actually the first time we voted. Or will vote.
So I get asked this, you haven't asked me the question, but I get asked this question quite a lot because so many people have gone into the voting booth and they have been completely confused. So if anyone is watching who may be thinking about moving to Israel and making Aliyah, or actually you can't vote unless you make Aliyah, of course you have to be Israeli. And by the way, just for those who know, you actually not just have to be Israeli to vote, and you not just have to be in Israel to vote, you have to have an address. You have to have a legitimate address. And also it's connected with paying your local taxes. So if, for example, you're an Israeli who now lives abroad, but wants to be in Israel for the general election, you fly in, you find yourself, you're removed from the electoral register. And I'm not sure that happens in any other Western country because most other countries have a proxy vote or some type of a postal vote, or that's in Israel, you have to actually be there and living there as well, not enough just to vote. But when you go into the voting booth, you have this big tray. And I was asked beforehand if I wanted to show some slides, but sometimes slides slow the process up. But this confuses a lot of people. It's not like you get a bit of paper and then you look for your candidate or you look for your party and you've got a pen and you make that cross. It doesn't work. There is no pens in there. There's no, possibly there might be a pencil in there, but that's for you personally to scribble down something on a bit of paper. There's what we call a petek, and there's a tray, a blue tray, blue for Israel, I suppose, blue like my shirt. And inside of that tray, there should be 39 slips. I always count them when I go in there. There's never 39 or however many parties are running because somebody's hupped some of them. So example, like a religious area, they've taken away the Yisrael Beitenu ones, the anti-religious party. Or in a right-wing area, they've taken away the Meretz ones. Or in a left-wing area, they've taken away a right-wing, something like that. But that's not to worry because you can actually just go out of the booth and ask the person who is behind the desk, the clerk, and just say, look, you're missing one of the slips. But basically, if you cannot read Hebrew letters, you're in big trouble because it's written, the names of the parties are not written on the slips. It's a Hebrew letter. And you have to know what party you're going to be voting for before you go into that election booth. Otherwise, you're in shtuch. Now, it's well known that Mahal, and I hope this is going to work because of this background over here. So this is for an example. Again, I'm just going to give you a few examples. I did this a few days ago, so I scribbled it down. So you've got a slip in front of you. See if this works over here. A slip in front of you about this size. So sometimes it's on a white paper or a light blue paper. So this is the letters Mem, Het, Lamed. That is the call sign for the Likud party. On the other side, if you see this one, and that will definitely be in the tray, Gimel. And you see this a lot on the election ads and on the posters as well, on the banners. Gimel, of course, stands for the United Torah Judaism Party, the Haredi Party. The other very famous one is Aleph Mem Tet.
Well, for politicians, Emet.
Emet, right. And do you know which party this belongs to?
Labour.
Yeah, Labour, of course. I knew somebody. Is that Shelley?
No, it's me.
Okay, me. Okay, that me, Mr. Me could be I'm only looking at three faces right now, but
okay. My name's Judy. You've been in correspondence with me.
Oh, okay, jolly good. So anyway, you have to know that particular. Now, inside the booth, it doesn't say. So when you're lining up outside, you're looking for that letter. Again, it does say outside in Hebrew, in English, in Russian, in Arabic. So it caters for that. But you go inside, you have to get. I was just speaking to a lady today, and in fact, I believe that she was with us earlier on, but it's very late here in Israel. So she left. But she pointed out that the last time that she voted, she forgot which letter she was looking for, and she put the wrong one in the envelope. So you pick up your petik you stick it in an envelope, put it in the envelope, you take that envelope, you seal the envelope, you take it outside, and you put it in a box outside. And that's it. That's your vote done. And by the way, rightly so, you have to show up with your Teudat Zeut. That's your ID number, which I think is should be a requirement everywhere, because otherwise you can very easily end up voting for somebody else twice, and hopefully the person won't recognize you. So that's important in Israel. But you have to know that letter. So many people get confused with this. But nevertheless, I think that lady was just messaging me just to say she did get it. She did find the petik and she put the right one in the end. But it does confuse a lot of people. Okay, let's move on with the questions.
One more. Go on, Gary.
You go first.
Okay, so my question was, where can you find the call signs for the parties outside of an election day, apart from on the hoardings? I have seen Lamed on Lieberman's adverts, so now I know what that means. So is there a list somewhere?
The list would be as you walk into the polling station. So, I mean, television, radio ads you're not going to see. Television, normally, actually, on the radio ads, you do hear like vote for Gimel or vote for Bet, Naftali Bennett's party, vote for Machal or something like that. You see, again, on every poster, on every banner, you'll see that letter, that call sign. But I can see that it's a problem for some people that they do sometimes forget. But as you walk in, again, I've never seen anyone look at the charts. Not last time, but the time before that, I went up to the chart and looked at it very, very carefully because it's fascinating. But people just think, oh, I don't need the chart. I don't need to read the instructions. I know what I'm doing. But here's another very interesting thing as well. And that is that around 20, and I'm included in this, around 20% of people go into that voting booth and they still do not know who to vote for. So how do they make their decision? Well, you pretty much know, again, we said this in the beginning, if you were with us, David and Shelley, at the beginning, am I right wing? Am I left wing? Am I in the center to right, center to left? Am I religious? That narrows it down from 39 parties to maybe 4 or 5 parties. That helps. So am I going to go for Bet? Am I going to go for Machal? Am I going to go for one of the other parties or the religious party? Which one should I go for? And people make up their minds, believe it or not, with the first slip that they see, which is on their list, and the first one that their eyes spot, then they pick that one up and put it in the envelope and then go out. So it's strange how it works, but that's the system.
So, James, a question we've been asked is, how likely do you think it is that Netanyahu will be able to avoid prosecution after the election?
So the trial has been put off until after the general election. Netanyahu is up for 3 indictments. The first indictment is receiving from a wealthy businessman many, many bottles of champagne, a whole load of cigars, and that's something which is considered to be against the rules and regulations of a prime minister. Nevertheless, as a prime minister, when you meet other leaders, you do receive gifts from them, and you also in turn give them gifts. But in this particular case, it was a wealthy businessman who gave them lots of gifts. Indictment number 2, which I think is also, that's indictment 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 was dropped, and indictment 4,000. So there's 2001 is, yes, looking for more favorable television and press coverage. So that was a very wealthy businessman who owns the Yediot Aharonot newspaper as well. Netanyahu met with him, recorded the conversation, and basically there was a deal between the two of them, which Netanyahu recorded the conversation. The deal was that Netanyahu says, I will work to get rid of Israel Hayom newspaper, which is the pro-Netanyahu newspaper, which is a free newspaper, and it's putting many of the others in a very difficult financial position. I will vote and I will work to get rid of it. And in response, you, Yediot Aharonot, you start to give me a little bit more favorable press coverage because you're anti-me right now. That was considered to be a breach of trust, and he's indicted for that. The third one, which is indictment 4,000, is a little bit more complicated. It involves also another news site, the news site Walla, very well known in Israel, also anti-Netanyahu. The owner of that also had a share in the British, not the British Telecom, but the Israeli Telecom, Bezek. And Netanyahu at the time, many years ago, was communications minister. And there were some deals which were done, which were seen to be not the right thing. He's indicted for that. The trial could go on for 2 or 3 years. But here's the thing. The people are saying, and this is what I think is fair after 3 elections, this will be the 4th election. The people are saying, you know what, establishment, you know what, the media, Channel 11, which is Khan, the public broadcaster, Channel 12, independent, Channel 13, independent, all of them, certainly Channel 12 and 13, really anti-Netanyahu in a massive way. Walla, anti-Netanyahu. Ynet, anti-Netanyahu. Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, anti-Netanyahu. They want him out. Yediot Aharonot, Ma'ariv. They want him out. The only pro-Netanyahu is Channel 20, which really struggles to get viewership because it doesn't have much money. And the other paper, which I just mentioned, Israel Hayom, Israel Today. Otherwise, everyone else is anti-Netanyahu. But it's so frustrating for the media and for the anti-Bibi camp, because it doesn't matter how much anti-Bibi publicity there is, people are still coming out to vote for Netanyahu. It drives them nuts. They can't believe it. They can't knock him out in the ballot. And by the way, I'm not speaking on behalf of Netanyahu, and I want to make that clear. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Likud party. I'm speaking according to what the polls are saying right now. And the polls are saying that despite these indictments, Netanyahu is 8, 9, 10 seats ahead. And the other parties are saying, we're not going to work with you. So if that means you're going to cause another 5th general election, and by the way, this election is costing twice as much as the last election because of the corona facilities set up. Now, if you're in isolation, you can still come out to vote. If you've got corona, you can still come out to vote. The special isolation voting booths that have been set up for them. It is costing the country 629 billion shekels, twice as much as the last election. With 20% unemployment, with people struggling to put food on the table, there are politicians who insist, you know what, I agree with everything at Netanyahu, or rather, I agree with everything the Likud party stands for, but I hate Netanyahu, never sit with him. Then this is a bad reflection of what's taking place in Israel. Gary.
Next question. Caroline Glick recently wrote about Netanyahu clawing back power from the Supreme Court should he win a majority. Do you see that as being realistic?
It's possible, yes, but it goes into great detail right now with regard to the Supreme Court. What in simplistic terms, excuse me, just drank some water, it went down the wrong hole. In simplistic terms, the right-wing parties believe that whoever is in government should have the right to pass legislation in the Knesset, and therefore that is law, and the Supreme Court should not be able to overrule that. And then if another faction party government comes in 3-4 years later and changes those laws, then again, they have the right to do that because the people voted that particular government in, say, for example, a left-wing government. So that is what Netanyahu, and by the way, Gideon Sa'ar and Naftali Bennett and the religious Zionists and the Shas and United Torah Judaism, all those on the right, by the way, but some of them, and by the way, Yisrael Beitenu as well, Lieberman's party, all those on the right want to do. They want to pass legislation to limit the power of the Supreme Court and say, you focus on your Supreme Court roles and regulations, but when legislation is passed in the Knesset, because this is what the people voted for us to be in government, and there'll be another general election in 2 or 3 years' time, and if people want to change it, a new government wants to change it, then fine. But it's time, really, for those who are voted in to pass those laws. And then if a government changes, you change the laws. That's generally what happens. So the answer is yes.
So the answer is yes, you think it's realistic?
Realistic that the right will limit certain powers of the Supreme Court in Israel because, as I said, the legislation should be passed in the Knesset. If I give you just a quick example, just to make this clear, the Supreme Court ruled last week, as I'm sure everyone knows, that it's permitted now for a Reform or a liberal or progressive rabbi to perform a conversion inside of Israel itself. And that now is allowed. So those on the right, and Netanyahu actually made this very clear a couple of days ago in a meeting that I sat in on, being interviewed, to say he's the most liberal person around. He's liberal when it comes to conversions, but nevertheless, he feels that the law should be changed, and if his party, with the religious parties, will form the next government, they will pass legislation in the Knesset to override that Supreme Court law. And the Netanyahu says, to be clear, that the reason is we don't want fake conversions. And he gives the example to say that he had to build a wall in the south of Israel. And if he hadn't have built a wall, there would have been more than 1 million African migrants coming into Israel. At one time, for almost a year and a half, there was more than 60,000 African migrants coming into Israel every single month. 60,000 for it was a year and 2 or 3 months, and then it went down to 30,000. A wall was built, similar to what Donald Trump spoke about. Netanyahu did it. And Netanyahu says, had I not built that wall, and again, I'm only quoting him, I'm not speaking on behalf of him, but Netanyahu makes it very clear, had I not built that wall, we would have had more than 1 million Africans coming in here. And in order for them to stay, they would have gone for conversion because some groups would have encouraged them to convert to Judaism. But they wouldn't, it would have been a fake conversion as such. So that's why it would be changed.
Thank you. And James, what I think is probably the last question, as the hour's hand is pointing towards the 9. A question from an Ola Hadasha. Please, can you repeat the essentials you need in order to vote? The person has just made Aliyah, has an Israeli passport, is an Ezrach Ola, and just wants to know what proof, what evidence will suffice.
The first thing you need to do is find out exactly which polling station you vote for. There is, this information should be readily available. In fact, they've made it very easy these days because there is a link that you can put in your ID number. There is a, I can't send you the link, but I do have a copy of that link. I mean, through Gary, maybe I can pass it on. But if you have all of that information, then you simply go along with your Teudat Zeut. That's very important. Photo ID, passport, or Teudat Zeut ID card. You show it to the Pakid at the front, or Pakida at the front. He will cross you off the list. You go in, and of course, you will line up like everyone else. This time it's social distancing, so you won't be close. You'll have to, of course, bring a mask with you as well and wear the mask. That's still law outside of Israel. And when you go inside, you will go into that booth, which we spoke about. No pen or pencil or crosses or anything like that on a piece of paper. You're simply looking for what we call a petik, a little bit of paper, like this. The example over here is, this one stands for Likud, Mahal. Sorry, it's going away, it's going, but pretty much it's the background. Okay, you know, you understand. And you're looking for your choice, your favorite one, the one that you wish to vote for. You will pick that up out of the tray. You will pop it in the envelope, which they've already given you. You come out, Ashira, and you pop it into the box, and you're very welcome. She just said thank you to me.
James, with that, I want to thank you very much. I think on behalf of everyone who has joined the call, it has really been incredibly clear. It's really exceeded expectations, really, because I haven't heard you speak before, and has been both interesting, enjoyable, and when we come to the next election, I'm sure possibly in 6 months' time, we will be listening to the recording yet again. We'll be doing Chazara to see what has changed and have this as our baseline. So again, many, many thanks. Thanks for all of those who have joined us, and wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for joining us, especially in Israel this late hour. Election day is on Tuesday. The results will be out the following Wednesday morning in the United Kingdom, and the final results will be available the following week. So let's see what takes place. I wish you all Hag Kasher v'Sameach. Thanks for joining.
Thank you,
James. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
It's really